Good evening and welcome to SkullNet 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I'm joined today by Hendry, who is a former SNP MP for Inverness. Good to have you.
Hello.
For our first story, we've got the Ukraine update, day 1077 of the conflict. President Donald Trump says he wants to negotiate an agreement with Ukraine in which Kiev guarantees supplies of rare earth metals, key elements used in electronics, in exchange for aid. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has floated such an idea last October as part of his victory plan for ending the war with Russia. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz criticized Trump's demand for quid pro quo, saying, quote, it would be very selfish and very self-centered. Such resources would be better used for the country's reconstruction after the war, Scholz said, after meeting with fellow EU leaders in Brussels. U.S. shipments of weapons into Ukraine were briefly paused in recent days before resuming over the weekend as the Trump administration debated its policy towards Kyiv, Reuters reported, citing 4 people briefed on the matter. A dire shortage of infantry troops and supply routes coming under Russian drone attacks are conspiring against Ukrainian forces in Pokrovsk, where decisive battles in the nearly 3-year war are playing out, and time is running short. Ukrainian soldiers in Pokrovsk said that Russian forces switched tactics in recent weeks, attacking their flanks instead of going head-on to form a pincer movement around the city, with Russians in control of dominant heights. Ukrainian supply routes are now within their range. Heavy fog in recent days prevented Ukrainian soldiers from effectively using surveillance drones, allowing Russians to consolidate and take more territory. Meanwhile, Ukrainian commanders say they do not have enough reserves to sustain defense lines and that new infantry units are failing to execute operations. The UN on Monday said the Russian forces have been killing more captured Ukrainian soldiers over recent months, echoing growing allegations from officials in Kiev. The UN monitoring missions in Ukraine said that since the end of August last year, it had recorded 79 such executions in 24 separate incidents by Russian forces. A bomb exploded in the lobby of a luxury apartment block in Moscow, killing a pro-Russia paramilitary leader from eastern Ukraine alongside his bodyguard. The bomb detonated just as a man with bodyguards entered the lobby of the Scarlet Sails residential complex on the banks of Moscow River on Monday, Russian media reported. An 18-year-old British man was killed in a Russian drone strike just minutes into his first mission after volunteering to fight in Ukraine. James Wilton from Huddersfield in West Yorkshire was 17 when he left the UK to fight against Russia, flying from Manchester to Poland before crossing the border into Ukraine. International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) Chief Rafael Grossi said late on Monday that he was on his way to visit Kiev and inspect a key substation that is critical for safety of Ukraine's nuclear power. More than half of the electricity consumed in Ukraine is generated by free nuclear power plants. But Russian missile and drone attacks on substations threaten the stable operations of nuclear power plants, according to Ukraine's Nuclear Inspector's Office. Pro-European Moldova, buffeted by Russia's invasion of its neighbor Ukraine, on Monday denounced what it said was a violation of its airspace by a drone and said it was discussing with its allies how to boost air defenses. Drew, passing over to you, what do you make of the developments in Ukraine?
Well, I think it continues to be worrying. It's hard to believe that it's 1,077 days that this illegal war has been raging. There's a lot of detail in the report that you've given just now. I think one of the things that everybody's looking for just now is how the election of Donald Trump is going to affect what's happening in Ukraine. And Zelensky, as ever, looks like he's been quite clever in saying, look, there's a resource here that we can trade, and he's playing on the make a deal aspect of that as far as we can see. they shouldn't have to do that, but it looks like that's what he's doing, because I think the fear was always that Donald Trump's quite well disposed to Putin, and that could cause further issues for Ukraine. But I think the real critical thing just now is that they continue to get the support they need, because obviously the gains that have been made by Russia are starting to, I think, bite. When you were talking about supply routes being under some difficulty now, that's a real worry for the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian forces in terms of repelling this illegal invasion. There's an awful lot in play in Ukraine at the moment. What we need to see is obviously some resolve, and resolve, first of all, not to forget about what's happening in Ukraine, and make sure that support is still there for people who are fighting against an illegal invasion, and that the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine continues to be protected as much as it can be in the face of this onslaught. But I think everybody is clearly looking at what the next move is going to be made by Donald Trump, whether or not that's going to help the situation in Ukraine or hinder them in terms of what's happening under Putin's forces. So it continues to be perplexing that we can't get a solution to this where Russia withdraws and restores the territory that it's illegally gained. But I think it's a very, very critical time indeed.
Thank you, Drew. Next up, we've got the Middle East update, where at least 47,540 Palestinians have been killed and 111,618 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2025, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump will likely appear in lockstep publicly when they meet this afternoon, despite facing sharp policy differences behind closed doors. The quote being that you will see a very lovey-dovey exterior, said a source told CNN. Inside, it's an epic meeting. The Israeli leader is determined that the second phase of a ceasefire deal with Hamas does not proceed in its current iteration, in which Israeli troops would fully withdraw from Gaza, the source told the outlet. Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam Brigades, held a funeral on Tuesday for its weapons and combat services commander, Ghazi Abu Tamah, who was killed in an Israeli strike. Footage by Associated Press showed fighters with the group riding in vehicles, raising their rifles in tribute, and playing music while carrying a poster bearing his image. Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, has held talks in Ankara with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The talks began shortly after Shara arrived in the Turkish capital on board an official Turkish plane, the AFP reported. Shara flew in from Saudi Arabia, where he has been seeking help to finance Syria's reconstruction and kickstart its economy following the country's civil war. Erdogan greeted Shara at the entrance of Ankara's vast presidential palace complex. Hamas says talks on the second phase of Gaza ceasefire deal have started. Talks on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal were confirmed by a spokesperson for Hamas. Drew, I suppose a lot of similar notes here to the Ukraine story, where people are trying to see what the Trump effect is here. How do you think that would play out, and what do you make of the rest of the situation as a whole?
Yeah, I think this is even more worrying in terms of your question about Trump, because one thing's clear, he's very dismissive of Gaza, about Palestine. And, he has a very poor record in terms of supporting what's happening there. The good news in this story, if there is any, is that it looks like there are talks underway to extend the ceasefire. And we've got to hope that continues, because as you reported over the past year and more, the death and toll, the injured, children, women, men, it just continues to rise. And I think you mentioned a figure of about 62,000 there as the last total. And of course, there will probably be some missing involved in that in terms of those are the reported dead. There'll probably be some missing, so 50,000, yeah. So so there'll probably be some many more injured. It's a scene of real carnage, and whenever you look at some of the aerial shots of the areas that have been bombarded and destroyed, it's reminiscent of the end of World War II and Hiroshima. The kind of devastation that's left on the ground there. There's not a lot of infrastructure left. So we must hope that the ceasefire continues as long as it possibly can. But I think the fact that Netanyahu is going to the White House is a signal that this is far from over, and it's going to be a very, very difficult path ahead for the people who've been fleeing the destruction in Gaza and the surrounding area.
Thank you very much. For our next story, we shift our focus to Scotland, where Shona Robinson leads the Scottish Government budget for 2025 to 2026 in a Stage 1 debate. Funding to drive down waiting time forms as part of a £21.7 billion investment in health and social care services in the 25 to 26 Scottish budget. Finance Secretary Shona Robinson has said that this is a key goal. Ahead of a key debate on the Scottish budget bill, Ms. Robinson visited a national treatment centre in Kirkcaldy to see how it is providing thousands of additional appointments and diagnostic tests. The Finance Secretary said the following: "The Scottish budget targets funding at measures to improve the lives of Scottish people, the record investment in the public services on which we all rely. Scotland's NHS is one of our most cherished institutions, which is why the budget provides £21.7 billion for health and social care, including £200 million to reduce waiting times and help tackle delayed discharge." The Stage 1 budget vote passed, with the SNP Scottish Government working across the Scottish Parliament with Greens and Liberal Democrat MSPs to produce a budget that delivers for Scotland. Labour abstained and the Tories voted against the budget. In the budget announced in December, the SNP government outlined plans to do the following. 1. Provide record funding for Scotland's NHS, a £2 billion increase. 2. Restore a universal winter heating payment to every pensioner household. 3. Develop systems to scrap the cruel two-child benefit cap by 2026. Allocate a record £15 billion for local government. Provide £768 million for affordable homes. Refusing to vote for progress for Scotland, Anna Sarwar finds himself on the wrong side of a dividing line in Scottish politics between two parties who want to get things done and parties who don't, in the comment by SNP MSP Kenneth Gibson, saying that it is clear now that the Scottish Parliament is divided into two parties who want to get things done and make progress for Scotland and parties who don't. The Scottish budget delivers record NHS funding, a restoration of pensioners' winter fuel support, over £750 million for more affordable homes, and £15 billion for local councils. Yet the Labour Party has sided with the Tories over making progress on those key issues, with polls suggesting Labour are on course for their worst ever Scottish Parliament election result. More and more questions are being asked about Anna Sarwar's weak and indecisive leadership. The quote goes on to say that in contrast, under John Swinney's leadership, the SNP government has delivered a budget that works for everyone in Scotland, that will ensure a reduction in NHS waiting times, action to drive economic growth, and to tackle the climate emergency, and progress towards eradicating child poverty. Now, Drew Hendry, we're going to take the time to break down some elements of this story and to make the most of your expertise while you're here. I suppose as a first note, I would just like to ask you what you see as some of the bigger successes of this budget passing.
Well, I think there are a couple of different ways you can cut this. And if you're asking me about some of the successes, I think, first of all, you have to look at the moral and political successes. I think one of the big errors that the UK Labour government have made with their budget was to slash the winter fuel payments for pensioners, and to fail to do anything at all about the two-child cap, which is in the scale of the UK finances is not as big a deal as they seem to make out, and yet it's a really oppressive condition to put on people. It's been given the nickname the rape clause because it means that if you have to prove you've been raped in order to break that that cycle. And the fact is that they could have done something about it, and they didn't. Well, the Scottish Government have done, and it won't come in until 2026 because the funds aren't there at the moment. But they've said that, look, this will be part of our budget in terms of making sure that we're putting funds in place to combat that, to neutralise it in effect with it, much like they've done in the past with the bedroom tax. And I think people often forget about all these other things that are still in play, which are mitigating UK government harms that would be affected on people and driving up the situation around poverty. The other success, I think, from this budget, although I think there are a number in there, but I think the headline one is the money that's being given to councils. I think it's £144 million to help them deal with which is equivalent, I should say, to about a 5% council tax increase, which is being paid to help them cope with the increases in employers' national insurance, which again have been brought in by the UK government. The effect not only the public sector, obviously it affects the private sector, and a lot of businesses are under tremendous stress in looking at reorganising the businesses and perhaps actually cutting employee numbers to deal with that. But in the public sector, it adds on to costs. It's much more difficult for councils and for arm's length bodies and others to actually deal with that. So the cost of that is actually quite an onerous condition. Now, there will be, as I understand, the Scottish Government expecting some compensation, but it won't go anywhere near the full cost of that. So I think protecting councils at the moment when they're putting their budgets together so that they can keep any increases they're putting forward to a minimum helps people across the piece. So those are a few of the kind of headline things where it looks like there's been some real success there, and both in a moral and political sense, I think those are good.
I suppose the second key element of the story would be Labour abstaining from a vote. Where do you think this abstainment comes from? What does this mean for Labour as a party? Anna Sarwar likes to speak that it is an autonomous body from UK Labour, where they will make their own decisions where it counts. What could there have been in this budget that wasn't worth agreeing with for somebody like the Scottish Labour Party?
I think the fact that they're abstaining actually tells you everything about the fact that they do agree that these are measures that should be taken in to Scotland and taken forward. Otherwise, they would be making their opposition clear. But they find it really difficult to do that, having campaigned on many of the things that they're now U-turning with at Westminster. It's very difficult for Anna Sarwar to vote against the budget, which is going to include measures over the two-child cap, for example. It's very difficult for him to vote against the budget, which includes measures for a winter heating allowance for pensioners. It's very hard for him to vote against a range of the other measures, including support for councils. So I think we've heard a lot about the fact that, from Anna Sarwar over the years saying that Scottish Labour is different. It's kind of independent of the UK Labour Party, but we see that actually when push comes to shove, that's not the case. And in fact, Scottish Labour MPs have stated that they take their instructions from the Westminster Party and from Keir Starmer. So I think it's pretty clear he's in a very difficult position, and in a different time and place in politics, many people might feel a bit sorry for him in terms of the position that he's in just now. But I don't think it's going to help him over the period of time, because I think one of the things that people want to see is, a very clear set of principles being applied. And I think the Labour Party are in real trouble when it comes to that. Now, they can say all they like about, different aspects of the Scottish government and other parties. But if they can't stick to their own principles, I think that puts them in a real difficult place when it comes to making a stand over things like the budget. And this is exactly where politics comes to a head, because politics is about decisions you make and discussions that you have about the way that you want to take things forward to better things for people. And when you abstain, effectively, you've got nothing to say on that. And that's where the Labour Party in Scotland find themselves at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Hendry. And as you mentioned there, the difficult situation for Labour continues with our next story, where Anas Sarwar says that he would not rule out what he calls the good ideas, some good ideas of Reform UK. The SNP has challenged Anas Sarwar to clarify, quote, which of Farage's backwards and damaging ideas he is open to after the leader of Labour in Scotland refused to rule out relying on votes for Reform MSPs after the 2026 Holyrood election. This follows UK-wide polling, which put Reform ahead of both Labour and Conservative parties, as well as a Scottish Parliament poll, which showed they could win of as many as 9 MSPs in 2026. Reform UK policies include privatisations of the NHS, backing Brexit, tax cuts for the wealthy, and abolishing devolution. Commenting, Stuart McMillan MSP says the following: people across Scotland will rightly be alarmed that Anas Sarwar is so desperate for power that he's willing to leave the door open to Nigel Farage. This is another own goal by an increasingly desperate Anas Sarwar. Farage's values are a threat to our economy and the most vulnerable in our society, and it's crucial we fight their toxic agenda rather than accepting it. Mr. Sarwar should now tell us what, quote, good ideas he thinks Nigel Farage has for Scotland. Drew, what do you make of this quote from Stuart McMillan MSP here, and what do you make of the story as a whole?
Well, I think the quote by Stuart McMillan is probably exactly what I would, asking the question I would have asked myself, is that which ideas from Nigel Farage, from the Reform Party are good so far, which of those would help to push Scotland forward, which are seen across the UK as being progressive, because I certainly haven't heard them myself. So I think I agree with Stuart on that. Look, this is quite bizarre, and it feeds into what we were talking about previously about being unable to position. We know that one of the reasons that Labour were able to get into power is because they tracked to the right. They became a much more right wing party in terms of what they were doing. We frequently hear Margaret Thatcher being quoted as a role model by Starmer and other ministers in his government, and this is just another example of where they seem to be terrified of the right. And Reform are not just a right-wing party; they're a very right-wing party, and some of the policies that you read out there just now, their isolationism, the being vehemently pro-Brexit, being anti-immigration, all of these things are things that do great harm to Scotland. We need an influx of skilled people here to help us with our industries. One of the reasons we've got difficulties in terms of recruitment in different sectors, in hospitality, in tourism and other industries, as well as in the health and care sector, is that we lost our EU citizens who are very welcome here and were very part of our community. But to now be saying, yeah, that's all right, and we'll effectively, what Anas Sarwar is saying is we'll enable that kind of political discussion by saying, they must have some good ideas there. I think he should be challenged. He should be repeatedly challenged to say, what are these ideas that you agree with, or that you would potentially agree with? What would you look to develop with the Reform Party if you were going to work with them? Because I think people would be really interested to hear that, and indeed deserve to hear that from somebody who has always said that he wants to put himself forward as a future First Minister for Scotland. So, I think it's absolutely right that he is held to account on that comment, and that he should explain to people what he means by that.
Thank you. For our next story, we have a new book claiming that Labour dropped plans to ban foreign donors after Wahid Ali intervened. It is being reported that Labour have dropped their proposals to ban foreign political donations after an intervention from Wahid Ali, the Labour peer who paid for Keir Starmer's clothes and glasses. Lord Ali, the party's fundraising chief in opposition, is said to have stopped the planned speech by Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, and Gordon Brown, who were planning to announce the changes, according to a new book about Labour's path to power. The Labour proposals would have scuppered any potential donations from the billionaire Elon Musk to Reform UK and would have made it illegal to make donations unless donors were registered to vote in the UK or via companies owned by people based in the UK. Labour have received £4 million from a hedge fund based in the Cayman Islands, Quadrature Capital, though it pays corporation tax in the UK in profits. Neither Labour nor Lord Ali have commented on the reports as yet. The book contained a leaked policy paper for the speech intended to take place on December 2023 at Chatham House. And suggests it had been signed off by Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's now Chief of Staff. A Labour source told the offers that Ali had intervened to pull the announcement with a week to go with no explanation. In its manifesto, Labour committed to, quote, protect democracy by strengthening the rules around donations to political parties. At the core of his promise was an aim to tighten protections around foreign interference in UK democracy. Drew, do you think there's a chance that a similar policy like this could pass with time under a different phrasing, or do you think Labour is just abandoning this concept of tightening rules around foreign investment?
Well, look, it's really worrying if this allegation that's been made in the book turns out to be true. And, you've got to say, when you look at the different facts, it seems highly likely that there was an intervention in this situation. My former colleague, Brendan O'Hara, MP, had raised an issue with Downing Street last year, asking them to detail the exact access and influence that Wahid Ali had within Downing Street. This is a man who, because of his political donations, actually holds a Downing Street pass to get in there. So this is, pretty serious access that this donor has within the seat of power in the highest office in the UK. And it really is quite troubling that there continues to be this kind of what appears to be cash for access, at the very top of the UK establishment. And this is not a new thing. We've seen peerages given out to donors in the past and to cronies and so forth. And, it really does add to the kind of rotten smell of UK politics and the situation and the both in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, where you've got this kind of influence happening. So the best thing they could possibly do is actually deliver on what they promised, which was to, put measures in place to clean up UK politics, to make it much more transparent about where these donations are coming from. But it does look as though they're not going to do that. And it now would be a surprise. It would be a pleasant surprise if they did bring something through forward to deal with this. If it was under some different wording, maybe then that might get through. But I suspect if we do see anything at all, it'll be a much more watered down version of what the original proposals were, and that would probably fit the pattern of what's happened in previous decades when this issue about access, cash for access, has come forward. So we wait and see, but it certainly doesn't look good, and it's not a good look either for Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister.
Thank you. More trouble for Labour, as Labour is facing growing internal revolt over plans to approve a Rosebank oil field. Sir Keir Starmer is facing a growing internal backlash over the potential approval of a giant new oil field after Treasury sources indicated Rachel Reeves was likely to give it her backing. MPs described a quote breaking point in relations and called for Starmer to reiterate his commitments to no further oil and gas licenses. The proposed Rosebank development was given the go ahead in 2023 but was ruled unlawful by a court last week. The UK Energy Secretary Ed Miliband has previously described the license issued to Rosebank as climate vandalism, setting up a potential major clash between his department and the Treasury. Reeves is understood to be supportive of a new application for environmental consent, with allies suggesting that would not violate Labour's manifesto, which promised not to issue new exploration licenses, but not to cancel ones that have already been issued. Miliband's department is due to publish new guidelines in late spring, which could scupper any attempt by the oil companies to successfully resubmit their applications. Climate-concerned MPs are likely to make their appeals directly to Keir Starmer about the importance of being seen to stand by the party's manifesto commitments of no new oil and gas licenses. Anger is widespread, even amongst centrist Labour MPs who have been major champions of infrastructure. Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar has hinted he expects the government to honour the previous commitments to grant the licence, but a number of new Scottish Labour MPs are opposed. The Rosebank row opened Scottish Labour to criticism from all sides, as seen on Monday when voices from across the political spectrum in Scotland attacked Starmer's, quote, broken promises, after the new boss of GB Energy, Jurgen Mayer, admitted in his first broadcast interview the Prime Minister's pledge of 1,000 jobs for Aberdeen could take up to 20 years. Drew, what is motivating Labour here to abandon some of these green eco goals and potentially continue with this oil access? Is this a part of the financial plans to recover from financial missteps, or what's in it for them?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I think the GB Energy admission, and let's face it, everybody before Labour were elected knew that this was not going to be an entity that was going to generate the kind of jobs that were being floated at the time. It was absolutely clear that it had no real teeth and wasn't going to be delivering in the way it should. So there's a deficit in terms of the promise there that's being missed out, and there might be perhaps some thinking that if they can grant these oil licenses, then it helps to protect, that job situation. But I think that's if that is the case, then that's pretty poor thinking. You also have got the situation where the UK government were getting quite a large windfall tax from oil and gas, and it may be part of their calculations that if they can continue this, they can plug some of the black hole that's been created by Westminster decision making that has left gaping holes in the public finances just now in many billions of pounds. One of the biggest ones, of course, being Brexit. So so there might be a little bit of desperation around how to get some income for the Treasury and some jobs. But I think the big issue here is about the hypocrisy of stating, as you mentioned, Ed Miliband when he was energy minister, stating that this was climate vandalism, and then suddenly everything's gone quiet again when it comes round to being politically or economically expedient to look to join in with the drill baby drill mantra that's going on just now. Now, I've no doubt that there will be arguments on the side of continued oil development and exploration in terms of where the trajectory is at the moment, but without investment in the just transition, which is where we should be putting, the UK should be putting investment into. And you noticed when Rachel Reeves came out with her infrastructure investment plan, there was nothing for Scotland. There should have been investment in infrastructure in Scotland for the just transition in order to protect those jobs, in order to create that wealth and value further on, the growth that's actually required in a clean way. And we are in a situation where we're seeing dramatic climate events across the world just now. When you look at what's been happening with the LA wildfires and so forth, that should be telling people that we need to at least consider the situation of when we're looking to grant. UK is looking to grant, because it's the UK who has the power over this. It's a reserve power for the UK government. When the UK is looking to grant licenses, there should be a climate assessment on that development. Because the facts of the matter is that while, yes, you might be able to extract oil and that might help the balance of payments, it doesn't answer the arguments about energy security directly, because the type of crude that's actually produced from North Sea oil is very different to the types that we're importing at the moment, and so that doesn't balance out. It's really about that export. But once again, I don't think there's any real consideration to either the situation for the Scottish economy or indeed the situation for the climate. But what there is political expediency. And I think that is why we're seeing this screeching handbrake turn in terms of the UK Labour policy over oil and gas drilling.
Thank you, Drew. Continuing our coverage of America and Trump's tariffs, of Johnny Walker, the whiskey distiller. Johnny Walker's whiskey distiller Diageo says Trump tariffs could hit profits by $200 million. Diageo, the company behind Smirnoff vodka and Johnny Walker whiskey, has said U.S. tariffs could damage a nascent recovery in its sales and result in a $200 million hit to profits, with its tequila portfolio and Canadian whiskey most affected. The drinks company returned to sales growth in the latest half year as strong performances for Guinness and tequila offset weaknesses in other spirits. But Donald Trump's 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports could stop this recovery in its tracks, analysts said. Diageo shares fell by a further 4% to the lowest since March 2020 after a 3.7% drop on Monday, on concerns about the impact of the tariffs on the US, its largest market. Canada and Mexico said they would retaliate. Donald Trump has paused the implementation by 1 month to allow for negotiation. Diageo reported net sales of $10.9 billion in the 6 months to December, down by 0.6%, while organic sales returned to growth of 1%. It made a profit before tax of $2.3 billion, down from $3.3 billion a year earlier. While sales of spirits declined by 3%, beer revenues grew by 13%, led by Guinness. Sales of non-alcoholic version Guinness 0.0 nearly doubled. The company scrapped its target of 5 to 7% annual sales growth, saying that the uncertainty in many of its key markets was affecting the pace of recovery. Drew, what is the likelihood of these tariffs coming into place? Obviously, they've been put on hold once now for a month. How do you see this playing out, and what markets are going to be affected?
Well, it's really difficult to say, because, as you've pointed out, Donald Trump has used these tariffs very much as a kind of blunt instrument. He's come in, he's said that he's going to do this, he's put it in place, and he'll be taking some comfort and some credit from some of the reactions that he's getting in terms of border controls and other things like that that are being assessed by Mexico and Canada, and so he'll be claiming that as a success of his strongman tactics over tariffs. What I think we do know is that he won't have any reluctance to put tariffs on goods where he thinks there's no great loss or for the US or for him politically. And that's where I think we should be a little bit concerned about what might happen with the drinks industry, because it took a long time for the previous tariffs to be even looked at by previous American administrations, again under Donald Trump. So so he does have a track record of of acting like this. I've absolutely no. It's no surprise that Diageo have been reporting the kind of stock figures that they've been reporting, the impact on their shareholdings, because the markets have been, frankly, in all over the place in retreat with the threat of this. There is, introducing tariffs is, effectively declaring trade war on other countries, and there's never been a situation in history where a trade war has worked out well for anybody really in these kinds of situations. Free trade tends to be the best way to operate, and protectionist measures tend to be very short-lived and have a lot of consequential effects. One of the effects that I think people should be really concerned about in the US, and consequently, because of that, we should be concerned about here and across Europe, is the effects on inflation. Because those are the kinds of things that tend to come out of these kinds of, let's say, bullish, acts when it comes to trade. So I think we'll have to wait and see what the long term effects are, but the short term effects have not been pleasant. I think are deeply worrying for people who have been affected by tariffs, and I think are politically upsetting. I think we've seen the reaction of likes of Canada, and the kind of response that they've been more or less forced to make about saying they'll be strong as well. We've seen what's happened with China. This is not a good place to be in, and hopefully some sense will prevail over the period of time. But it's certainly not something that's the track record of a Trump administration.
And I suppose just touching on this because you mentioned it, and keeping it somewhat short in the interest of time, you mentioned how this could affect different drinks markets. Are you worried, for example, Scotland's whiskey trade being damaged, or do you think UK for now is looking to be mostly untouched by these Trump tariffs?
Well, I think I would always be worried, and I think people in the industry would be worried about tariffs on Scotch whisky. One of the saving aspects of this is that because of the tariffs last time, the very high tariffs that were in the US, the drinks manufacturers, the whiskey manufacturers had actually diversified quite a bit and looked for new markets, and actually it opened up quite a lot of new markets in that time. So I think Scotch whisky is being exported far more widely now, and it's been a massive exporting success for Scotland, and obviously from the UK Treasury's point of view for quite a period of time. But there's no doubt that the US market is still substantial, and it can be quite an easy hit for somebody like Trump to impose these kinds of tariffs. And of course, it doesn't actually help America either, because they've got things like bourbon exports and so forth that they want to make in return. And when tariffs go into place, there's often some kind of retaliatory action. So yes, I'm concerned about that. I think that most people in the drinks industry in the food and drink industry would be concerned about that too. But like I say, I think what we have to do is have a watching brief and try and discourage it as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. For our next story, we've got 10 dead in an attack on an education campus in the city of Örebro in Sweden. Police have said 10 or so people have been killed and at least 5 others wounded in a campus shooting in the southern Swedish city of Örebro, in what Sweden's Prime Minister has described as a very painful day for the country. Roberto Ede Forrest, the head of local police, said investigating officers were still in the process of identifying victims, but they believed the primary perpetrator, not previously known to police, was among the dead. He said authorities had no prior warning signs of the attack, which happened soon after 12:30 p.m. local time on Tuesday at a campus housing an adult education center and other learning facilities, and that it was believed the gunman acted alone. At the moment, we are confident that no more attacks will occur, Forrest said, although police could not rule out others having been involved. The campus and local schools where students had been in lockdown had been safely evacuated, he said. The Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, described the attack in the city, which is situated about 125 miles, 200 kilometers west of Stockholm, as a terrible act of violence and as a very painful day for all of Sweden. He said the government was in close contact with police and the operation was continuing, adding, "My thoughts are with all those whose normal school day was turned into fear. Being locked up in a classroom, fearing for your life, is a nightmare no one should have to experience." Police needed to be allowed the, quote, peace of mind they need to investigate what happened and how these horrific crimes could have occurred, Christensen said. Forrest gave no further information about the injured, saying that the reason we cannot be specific at this time is that the damage outcome is so great. Police had earlier said 4 people had surgery and 1 was in serious condition. Drew, what do you make of this tragedy?
Well, it is just what you've said. It's an absolute tragedy, and I think when we hear about these, particularly school and education campus shootings, it just makes you despair that people would take action like that. And unfortunately, it's become a more common news story now to hear about these mass shootings. They hear about cars ramming into people and so forth, and different types of attacks. What Sweden actually has some pretty strict gun laws. They're not nearly as strict as the UK ones, but the fact that we have this tragedy, I think, is it's just something that that needs to be. We need to look at the root causes of this, try and understand why these kinds of things happen, and and I think Sweden and other countries should look to some of the measures that have happened here. And one of the good things that we had here in the UK was the banning of handguns and really strict laws. I know that's a bit more challenging in countries like Sweden because there's a lot of illegal arms trade that goes on, and there's perhaps a more prevailing culture over weapons. But it must be absolutely devastating for the families of those who are caught up in it, and it's becoming very it's a terrible burden that people are having to bear to when you're in these local communities, when they have to try and pick up the pieces after such an event. As I say, it's been a long time since we had incidents like Dunblane here, but that still has left a scar on just about everybody who who I even heard about it, let alone was near there. So you can't imagine what's going on for those communities where these things are happening at the moment. And I think every one of us must feel for the families and the people that have lost loved ones and that have been caught up in this just now. It's an absolutely horrendous attack.
Thank you, Drew. And for our final story of the day, the University of St. Andrews is to benefit from a €5 million grant project funding. The University of St. Andrews is part of a group of European institutions to benefit from a €5 million grant that will provide funding for 18 PhD students to research critical raw metals and train to become elite experts in geoscience. The EU grant from the Mary Skłodowska-Curie Actions will fund a new consortium called Formove Fluid, which will study how fluids transform the materials inside the Earth's crust. Dr. Will McCarthy from the University of St. Andrews School of Earth and Environment Studies said, "Our new grant will support 18 future leaders in advancing sustainable access to essential water, metal, and geothermal energy resources. By improving our understanding of how, where, and when fluids move through rock formations, this initiative will drive innovative solutions for resource exploration and environmental protection. This cutting-edge research will help secure critical resources while promoting environmental sustainability." Critical raw materials, CRMs, are a set of 34 chemical elements and mineral resources vital to the European economy. CRMs are scarce yet essential to certain strategic sectors, such as net zero electronic and aerospace. These CRMs are the building blocks of many renewable technologies. Copper, lithium, and nickel are all required to make batteries, and gallium for solar panels, and boron for wind technologies. The EU currently relies heavily on the single source countries for certain critical raw materials, such as magnesium, coming from China and providing 97% of it, lithium, where Chile provides 97% of it, iridium from South Africa at 93%, and niobium from Brazil at 92%. Making supply chains extremely vulnerable. In addition, some countries have begun to restrict their exports of these materials, such as China and its production of gallium and germanium, two metals essential for microprocessors. The project will aim to allow researchers to understand the origin of the so-called critical raw materials of vital importance for the energy transition. Over a period of 4 years, Four-Move Fluid, Mary Carey researchers will tackle this challenge by combining cutting-edge laboratory techniques and fieldwork to 4 different countries: Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and Spain. Four-Move Fluid aligns with the EU's new Critical Raw Materials Act, which ambitiously aims to have 10% of critical raw material consumption extracted within the EU's own borders. The call for PhD applications is now open. Any researcher who fits the eligibility criteria is encouraged to reply. Drew, what do you? A mostly positive story, from what I understand. How do you look at things like this? How do you think this can impact energy? And are you happy that this is spread effort pioneered by Europe overall?
Yeah, I think it's a great story overall. It's if you look at, first of all, the need to have proper research and understanding of critical raw materials. It's an untold story of the fact that the future of industry really relies on a lot of this this kind of material, and having an understanding and ability to deal with it and expertise in it is absolutely critical. So first of all, that's the right thing to do. The fact that, again, Scottish University being recognised as one of the top places to do research business, to invest in, I think is good. And it's a bit of a nice reminder of the relationship we could and should have with our partners across the EU in terms of developing things. And it's a rare kind of exception to the rule just now, where we're actually seeing this cross cooperation and investment in education that's sadly been taken away because of the fact that we've been affected so negatively by Brexit. So this is a really good story. It's good for our universities. It's the right thing to do. It's a great story about collaboration across the piece. It's about education and understanding. So it's a good place after such a long series of reports about wars and trade wars and political shenanigans to have something nice like this to have at the end of the programme.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will be wrapping up for this evening of Scotland at 7. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, just £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We needed to borrow that remaining £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive. But the pressure is still on, and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers. We need to clear our debts as well. Our programs will always be free to view, but if you can afford our £5 a month as a subscription, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can. Thank you again to Drew Hendry for joining us today with his expertise. It was lovely having you.
Thank you.
And with that, goodbye, and thank you for watching.